The letter trembled in Louisa Pendleton's hands as the stagecoach rattled across the dusty Wyoming plains. August 1878, she journeyed nearly 2,000 miles from Boston to meet her future husband, only to discover her fate might hang by the thinnest of threads. She unfolded the hastily written note once more, her heart sinking as she reread the words that had been waiting for her at the last stop. Miss Pendleton, circumstances have changed. My situation no longer permits me to honor our arrangement. I apologize for any inconvenience. Harold Whitmore, the coach hit a rut, jolting Louisa from her thoughts. Outside the window, the vast expanse of the frontier stretched endlessly, painted in shades of gold and amber by the setting sun. She tucked the letter into her reticule and straightened her travel-worn skirts, determined not to let anyone see the fear building inside her. 23 years old, alone, with only $15 to her name, what was she to do now? First time out west, miss? The older woman across from her smiled kindly, her weathered face speaking of many years under the prairie sun. Yes, Louisa replied, forcing a smile. I was to be married in Silver Creek. The woman's face softened with understanding. Mail-order bride? My daughter did the same last year. She paused, studying Louisa's expression. Something's gone wrong, hasn't it? Louisa nodded, fighting back tears. He's changed his mind. Oh dear. The woman reached across to pat Louisa's hand. Silver Creek's a decent town. Sheriff keeps it orderly, and there's work if you're willing. My sister runs the boarding house there. Tell Martha that Agnes sent you, and she'll give you a fair rate while you figure things out. Thank you, Louisa whispered, grateful for this small kindness. The stagecoach slowed as they approached the outskirts of town. Louisa gathered her courage along with her modest luggage, one trunk and a carpet bag containing everything she owned in the world. As the coach rolled to a stop, she took a deep breath and stepped down into the dust of Silver Creek, Wyoming. The main street bustled with activity despite the late hour. Cowboys and townspeople moved between the saloon, general store, and other establishments that lined the street. Louisa stood uncertainly beside her trunk, the reality of her situation settling over her like a heavy blanket. Miss, you need some help with that trunk. Louisa turned to find a tall man watching her with curious blue eyes. His face was tanned from the sun, and his clothes marked him as a rancher or cowboy, well-worn but clean, with a gun belt slung low on his hips. He removed his hat, revealing sandy hair in need of a trim. Thank you, but I can manage, she replied, though the trunk was indeed too heavy for her to carry far. No offense, madam, but that trunk looks mighty heavy for someone your size. He smiled, and Louisa noticed a small dimple in his left cheek. I'm Jake Jameson. My ranch is just outside town. I'd be happy to help you to wherever you're headed. Louisa hesitated, weighing her limited options. I'm looking for the boarding house. Martha's boarding house. Jake's expression brightened. Martha Simmons? Sure, I know it well. It's just down the street. He gestured toward a two-story white building with a small sign out front. May I? He nodded toward her trunk. That would be very kind, Mr. Jameson. I'm Louisa Pendleton. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Pendleton. He hoisted her trunk with ease. New to Silver Creek? Yes, she replied simply, not ready to share her embarrassing situation with a stranger, no matter how helpful. They walked in silence for a moment before Jake spoke again. What brings you to our little town? Not many single ladies make the journey unless they've got family waiting. Louisa felt heat rise to her cheeks. I had an arrangement, but it seems to have fallen through. Understanding dawned in Jake's eyes. Would that arrangement have been with Harold Whitmore? Louisa stopped walking. You know him? Jake shifted the trunk slightly. Everyone knows everyone around here. Whitmore owns the mercantile. Word is he's engaged himself to the banker's daughter as of yesterday. Caused quite a stir. The news hit Louisa like a physical blow. Not only had Harold rejected her, but he'd already found someone else, someone wealthier, no doubt. She'd been a fool to think a man would wait for a stranger when local prospects presented themselves. I see, she managed, continuing their walk with as much dignity as she could muster. For what it's worth, Miss Pendleton, Jake said quietly, I think the man's a fool. They reached the boarding house, and Jake set her trunk down on the porch. Martha Simmons proved to be exactly as Agnes had described, fair but businesslike, with a no-nonsense attitude that Louisa found reassuring. When Louisa mentioned Agnes, Martha's stern face softened slightly. "Any sister of Agnes is welcome here," she declared. "I've got a small room available. $5 a week, includes breakfast and supper." Louisa's heart sank. At that rate, her money would last 3 weeks at most. "Do you know where I might find work in town?" Martha looked her up and down. "Can you cook?" "Yes, quite well." "So, I'm skilled with a needle. Read and figure?" "I was a teacher's assistant in Boston." Martha nodded approvingly. "The hotel might need help in the kitchen. The dressmaker was looking for an assistant last week. And the schoolteacher's expecting a baby, they'll need someone to finish the term." She paused. "For now, I could use help with the washing and cooking here. I'll take $1 off your weekly rate." Relief washed over Louisa. "That would be wonderful. Thank you." Jake, who had been standing quietly on the porch, spoke up. "I should be going. Miss Pendleton, it was a pleasure." He settled his hat back on his head. "If you need anything, my ranch is the Double J, just 3 miles north." As he walked away, Martha gave Louisa a knowing look. "Jake Jameson's a good man. Works harder than most. Built that ranch from nothing after his parents died. Been watching him ride into town every Saturday for supplies for years now. Never seen him help a lady with her luggage before, though." Louisa felt a blush creep up her neck. "He was just being kind." Martha hummed, not convinced. "Well, come on in and get settled. Supper's in an hour." The next morning, Louisa awoke to the sound of roosters and distant cattle. Her small room was sparse but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and a hook on the wall for her few dresses. She dressed quickly in her plainest gown and headed downstairs to help Martha with breakfast for the boarders. By noon, she had secured a position at the dressmaker's shop 3 days a week. Mrs. Henderson, the dressmaker, had been impressed by Louisa's fine stitching and had agreed to pay her 50 cents a day. It wasn't much, but combined with her arrangement with Martha, it would extend her stay while she looked for more permanent work. As she walked back to the boarding house, a commotion near the mercantile caught her attention. A crowd had gathered, and raised voices carried across the street. Curiosity drew her closer, where she found Harold Whitmore, a short, balding man with nervous eyes, arguing with a woman who must have been the banker's daughter. "I've already ordered the fabric, Harold. The wedding cannot be postponed again." The woman's shrill voice carried easily. "Margaret, please lower your voice. Everyone's watching," Harold pleaded, looking mortified. "Let them watch. I want everyone to know you're a spineless." Louisa turned away, having seen enough. She had no desire to witness the domestic troubles of the man who had rejected her sight unseen. As she walked away, she nearly collided with Jake Jameson, who was exiting the gunsmith's shop. "Miss Pendleton," he greeted her, tipping his hat. "Getting acquainted with our local theater?" He nodded toward the arguing couple. Despite herself, Louisa smiled. "It seems I had a fortunate escape." Jake's expression grew serious. "More than you know. Whitmore's up to his eyeballs in debt to Margaret's father. That's why he's marrying her, though it seems she's no prize either." He offered his arm. "May I walk you somewhere? Away from this spectacle?" Louisa hesitated only briefly before accepting. "I was headed back to the boarding house." As they walked, Jake asked about her job prospects, and Louisa found herself sharing more than she'd intended about her position at the dressmaker's, her hope to perhaps teach, and even a little about the life she'd left behind in Boston. "My father was a professor," she explained. "When he died last year, I had few options. The school where I assisted couldn't pay me enough to support myself. When I saw Mr. Whitmore's advertisement for a bride." "You saw a chance for a new beginning," Jake finished for her. "Yes. Foolish, I suppose. Brave," Jake corrected. "Takes courage to leave everything you know behind." They reached the boarding house, and Louisa reluctantly withdrew her hand from his arm. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Jameson." "Jake, please." His smile made that dimple appear again. "I'll be in town on Saturday for supplies. Perhaps I could call on you then." Louisa felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with anxiety. "I'd like that." True to his word, Jake appeared at the boarding house the following Saturday, hat in hand and wearing a clean shirt. He took Louisa to the small restaurant next to the hotel, where they talked for hours over coffee and apple pie. Jake told her about his ranch, modest by Wyoming standards, but growing steadily, and about his dream to build a proper house to replace the cabin he currently lived in. "My foreman," Hank and 2 hands help run things, he explained. Good men, all of them. Came with me when I split from the rocking T 5 years ago to start my own place. That's impressive, Louisa said sincerely. To build something from nothing. Jake shrugged modestly. Still building. Hard work, but worth it to have something that's mine. He paused, his expression growing more serious. Speaking of building, the school board met yesterday. Mrs. Collins won't be returning after Christmas. The baby's due in January. Louisa's heart quickened. Do you think they would consider me as her replacement? I mentioned your name. They'd want to meet you, of course, but they're desperate. There are 27 children in that schoolhouse ages 6 to 16, and no one else in town has your qualifications. Thank you, Louisa breathed. Teaching would provide stability she desperately needed. Over the next weeks, a routine developed. Louisa worked at the dressmaker's, helped Martha at the boarding house, and visited the school to observe Mrs. Collins' teaching methods. Jake came to town every Saturday, and their outings became something Louisa looked forward to all week. As October turned the plains to gold, Louisa found herself thriving in Silver Creek. The townspeople had accepted her, and even the revelation that she had been Harold Whitmore's intended bride had caused only a brief stir of gossip. Harold himself avoided her, especially after his marriage to Margaret had been postponed yet again due to financial concerns. On a crisp Saturday in late October, Jake arrived at the boarding house earlier than usual, a worried expression on his face. Is something wrong? Louisa asked as they walked toward the town's small park. Maybe. There's word of rustlers operating near the Sweetwater. 3 ranches hit in the last month. He ran a hand through his hair. I've doubled the night watch, but if they come, we could lose a lot of cattle. Louisa touched his arm. Is there anything I can do? Jake covered her hand with his. Just knowing you're concerned helps. He cleared his throat. Actually, there is something else I wanted to discuss. The school board met yesterday. They'd like to offer you the teaching position starting January 3rd. Joy bubbled up in Louisa. Truly? Oh, Jake, that's wonderful news. $50 a month, and you can stay in the small house behind the school. It's not much, but it's part of the compensation. A house of my own, Louisa marveled. After months of uncertainty, the future suddenly looked bright. That evening, as Jake walked her back to the boarding house, he stopped under a large oak tree. The setting sun cast long shadows across the street, and in the distance, someone was playing a fiddle at the saloon. Louisa, Jake began, uncharacteristically hesitant. These past weeks, getting to know you. They've been the best of my life. Louisa's heart pounded as Jake took her hands in his. Mine too, she admitted softly. I know it's soon. Too soon, probably. But life out here moves at its own pace. He took a deep breath. I'm falling in love with you, Louisa Pendleton. I think maybe I started falling the moment I saw you standing lost by that stagecoach. Tears pricked at Louisa's eyes. Oh, Jake. I'm not asking for promises right now. Just, would you consider visiting the ranch next Saturday? Meet Hank and the boys, see the place? I'd bring you back before dark, of course. I'd love to, Louisa whispered, squeezing his hands. Their moment was interrupted by shouts from down the street. The sheriff and several men were running toward the bank, guns drawn. Jake instantly moved Louisa behind him, shielding her with his body. Stay here, he ordered, drawing his own pistol and moving toward the commotion. Ignoring his instruction, Louisa followed at a distance. A crowd had gathered outside the bank, where Sheriff Miller was addressing the onlookers. Bank's been robbed, Jake reported when he returned to her side. Sheriff thinks it was the Slater gang. They hit the bank in Casper last month. Was anyone hurt? No, thank God. But they got away with nearly $10,000. The robbery was the talk of Silver Creek for days afterward. The banker, Mr. Preston, had been beside himself, especially since his future son-in-law, Harold Whitmore, had been in the bank during the robbery and had fainted dead away. Margaret had broken off their engagement publicly the following day, calling Harold a coward to his face in the middle of the street. Despite the excitement in town, Louisa looked forward to her visit to Jake's ranch with growing anticipation. When Saturday arrived, he picked her up in his wagon, a gleaming smile on his face. You look beautiful, he said, helping her up to the seat. Thank you. Louisa smoothed her best day dress, a deep blue that brought out her eyes. She'd spent hours the night before making sure it was perfect. The Double J Ranch lay in a picturesque valley, with a small stream running through the property. The main house was indeed a cabin, though larger than Louisa had imagined, with a wide porch and smoke curling from the stone chimney. Several outbuildings and corrals surrounded it, and cattle grazed on the hills beyond. "It's lovely," Louisa said honestly as Jake helped her down from the wagon. "It's home," he replied simply, pride evident in his voice. The foreman, Hank, was a grizzled older man with kind eyes who clearly thought the world of Jake. The two ranch hands, brothers named Tom and Sam, were polite if a bit shy around Louisa. They all ate lunch together at the large table in the cabin, sharing stories and laughing. Louisa couldn't remember feeling so at ease, so welcomed, in a long time. After lunch, Jake showed her around the ranch, pointing out improvements he planned to make and telling her stories about different animals. As they walked alongside the stream, he took her hand, and they fell into a comfortable silence. "I could see myself here," Louisa said suddenly, surprising herself with the admission. Jake stopped walking, turning to face her. "Could you?" The hope in his eyes made Louisa's breath catch. "Yes, it's beautiful and peaceful, and—" She gathered her courage. "And you're here." Jake stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Louisa, I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling right, natural. He cupped her face gently and leaned down to kiss her, a soft, tender kiss that promised more. When they parted, Louisa felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. "I want to court you properly," Jake said. "And when you're ready, no rush, I want to make a life with you. Here, if you'll have me." "Yes," Louisa said simply, her heart full. Their happiness was short-lived. As they returned to the main house, one of the ranch hands came galloping up, his horse lathered with sweat. "Boss, rustlers. They're hitting the north pasture." Jake's expression hardened instantly. "How many?" "At least 5 men. They're cutting out the herd toward the ridge." Jake turned to Louisa, conflict evident in his eyes. "I have to go." "I know," she said, fear gripping her heart. "Please be careful. Hank will take you back to town," Jake said, already moving toward the stable. "I'll come see you as soon as I can." The ride back to Silver Creek was tense, with Hank checking over his shoulder repeatedly and keeping his rifle across his lap. When they reached the boarding house, he escorted Louisa to the door. "Don't you worry, Miss Pendleton. The boss can handle himself, and those rustlers won't know what hit them." Despite his reassurance, Louisa barely slept that night, worrying about Jake and the danger he faced. The next day dragged endlessly as she waited for news. By evening, unable to bear the suspense any longer, she walked to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Miller was just mounting his horse when she arrived. "Miss Pendleton, I was just heading out to the Double J. Got word there was trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Louisa asked, dread pooling in her stomach. "Not sure yet. One of Jake's hands rode in for the doctor. Said there was shooting." Seeing her distress, the sheriff's expression softened. "Would you like to come along?" Doc's following behind in his buggy. Without hesitation, Louisa climbed onto the sheriff's second horse, her skirts be damned. They rode hard toward the ranch, the setting sun casting long shadows across the plains. When they arrived, the scene was chaotic, men moving about with lanterns, voices raised in urgent conversation. Louisa dismounted and ran toward the house, her heart pounding. Inside, she found Jake lying on a cot in the main room, his face pale but his eyes open. A bloody bandage wrapped his upper arm. "Louisa?" He struggled to sit up. "What are you doing here?" She rushed to his side, relief making her knees weak. "I had to come. They said there was shooting." Jake grimaced. Caught the rustlers red-handed. They didn't take kindly to being interrupted. He nodded toward his arm. "Just a graze. I've had worse from barbed wire." The doctor arrived then, shooing Louisa aside to examine Jake's wound. She waited anxiously until he pronounced Jake would recover fully with proper rest. Outside, Sheriff Miller was questioning the ranch hands. "Did you recognize any of them?" "One looked familiar," Hank said slowly. "Can't place him, but I've seen him in town." "We caught one," Tom added. "He's tied up in the barn. Others got away." The sheriff nodded. "I'll take him back to Silver Creek. We'll get names out of him." Louisa stayed at Jake's side through the night, bathing his fevered brow when infection set in and refusing to leave even when Hank offered to take over. By morning, Jake's fever had broken, and he watched her with wonder as she changed his bandage. "You're still here," he murmured. "Of course I am," she replied, gently securing the fresh bandage. "I love you, remember?" A week later, the full story emerged. The rustler they'd captured had confessed everything. The gang had been operating throughout the territory for months, stealing cattle and selling them across the state line. Most shocking of all, their contact in Silver Creek, the man who provided information on which ranches to hit and when, had been Harold Whitmore. Apparently, he owed money to some unsavory characters in Cheyenne. Sheriff Miller explained to Jake and Louisa. Gambling debts. When the bank robbery went south and his engagement ended, he got desperate. Harold was arrested and would stand trial for his part in the rustling operation. The town buzzed with the scandal, but Louisa found she felt only pity for the man who had once rejected her. "Imagine if I'd married him," she said to Jake as they sat on the porch of his cabin one evening in late November. His arm was healing well, and he'd insisted on bringing her back to the ranch as soon as he could ride. "I can't," Jake replied, taking her hand. "Because from the moment I saw you, I believed you were meant for me." Louisa smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "It's strange to think that his rejection led me to you. That something that seemed so terrible could lead to such happiness. Life has a way of working out," Jake agreed. "Speaking of which," he shifted to face her, suddenly serious. "I know we talked about courting properly, taking our time. But these past weeks, the rustlers, the shooting, they've reminded me how precious time is." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring with a modest diamond. "This was my mother's. I've been carrying it, waiting for the right moment." Louisa's breath caught as Jake slid from the bench onto one knee before her. "Louisa Pendleton, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You're brave and kind and strong, everything I could ever want in a wife. Would you do me the incredible honor of marrying me?" Tears filled Louisa's eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Jake. Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. They were married on Christmas Eve in Silver Creek's small church, with the whole town in attendance. Martha Simmons cried openly, muttering that she'd known all along they were perfect for each other. Mrs. Collins, huge with child, played the organ, and even Hank cleaned up impressively for his role as best man. As they exchanged vows, Louisa thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fear and uncertainty when she'd first arrived, rejected and alone, and the unexpected joy she'd found instead. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jake looked into her eyes with such love that Louisa knew beyond any doubt that this was where she was meant to be all along. Spring brought new beginnings. Louisa divided her time between teaching at the schoolhouse and helping Jake expand the ranch. They'd begun construction on a proper house, nothing grand, but spacious enough for the family they hoped to have. The rustling gang had been brought to justice, and the Double J's herd was thriving. One warm evening in May, they sat on the porch of their nearly completed home, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Jake pulled Louisa close against his side, his hand resting protectively over her slightly rounded belly. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Louisa smiled, placing her hand over his. "Completely. Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible." Jake's voice was thick with emotion. "When I think about how close we came to never meeting, if Harold Whitmore hadn't been a coward and a fool, then I would have thanked him," Louisa finished, turning to look into her husband's eyes. "Because his rejection led me to where I truly belonged." Jake smiled, that dimple appearing in his cheek. "With me?" "With you," Louisa agreed, leaning up to kiss him as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Always with you."